Here are the diehards. We come to the end of this series. And we come to the end of this series. 14 out of 14. Before I do, I'm sure I'm going to get things out of order, but it doesn't matter. I do think before we do anything else, we should thank all the technical people for all the work that they do over here. Yeah, Bill Sachs is on home territory tonight, as you know. Howard works with me in and out of London. It's quite a story over there, right? And of course, we have Tall, Dark, and Handsome running the video, right? Keep it on the screen. That's all I want. Let's see. Do I have this here tonight? Let me start by thanking Ner Talmud, of course, which is very nice of them, and our sponsor, the RZA, for the whole series. And as we all know, so we made it through the entire Geschichte over here. Now we managed to scratch the surface of 57 to 61. Barely scratched the surface. Tonight I want to thank specifically the Markowitzes, as you see over here, in memory of their parents and her brother. I remember him. And I also want to thank a certain anonymous person who is with us tonight, but as you see, it's very moving. In memory, Ili Nishmas, of the following individuals for whom the state of Israel is so important. Okay? So obviously, you understand that this is not a subject without meaning. Tonight, of course, we are at the end of this series. Next week, I hope to start the next one, which will be at Shomrei. The reason I'm doing it right after one after the other, even though I prefer to take a break, is because I'm running against Shabbos. So notice as the days are getting longer, I have to chaperine, as they say, when Shabbos is still relatively short. For the first couple weeks, I'll be able to do it at 8:30, and you and I both prefer to start earlier on Saturday night. This is obviously not the same thing as the history of the state of Israel. This is where I hope to play around, have some fun with the people who have formed your memory. Because what do you know? You don't know the past. Nor do I. Nobody does. We weren't there. So you only say, well, we read. So who wrote it and why? You get it? So how do you know your Geschichte? Somebody made it up. And here it is. What's that? 10 o'clock? 10 o'clock is not for your older types. It's only... Yeah. I'm running against the clock. That's the reason I'm starting so quickly. So this will really be for the diehards, and that's the way it is. Unless we work something different out. But meanwhile, if we don't start with the plan, it ain't going to happen. Let me share something with you. I was just talking with Ari about it because I don't plan to advertise this much, but I do. Pesach is around the corner, and I am trying again to do the White House, even though they messed me up 2 times. They hear me out. So the problem is they won't allow more than 50. Okay? So I'm sharing with you because you're here tonight. So you're good enough to be here tonight. I'm sharing with you. So it's the first 50. I got to get the names there ASAP, as was the case in the past, because that's the rules. And so as soon as I get 50 names or 45 or something like that, I'm going to send it in there. I was told by Barbara Mikulski and so forth that if we keep it to 50 or thereabouts, there's 9 out of 10 chance that they'll say yes. So there's no guarantee on anything, and it could be that Netanyahu and him have a spat that week, and they'll cancel all the Jewish tours. You can never know with this White House. But if anybody's interested in getting along there, I'm going to need a commitment now, right? It'll be I think Tuesday. I believe it'll be Tuesday of Chol Hamoed. I think that's what it's going to be. It'll be Tuesday of Chol Hamoed. But I totally understand if somebody doesn't want to patchkut this. And I have no doubt that we'll get to 50 without too much difficulty, because last time I had 250. So, but yeah, that's right. They just canceled it, right? So that's correct. So the bottom line is, I'm sharing this with you now. If anybody's interested, get in touch with me, because I hope in a week or 2 or 3, I'll have to tell everybody no, because we filled up. So enough said on that subject. So anyway, this is going to be in this coming week. As you see, it's very kindly going to be sponsored by the Lehman family. That enables me just to get on with the work that I do best. Let's move on to the next item. As you see over here in this shul, there's going to be a 60s night. That means you can only allowed to come here if you're 60 and above. You understand? Okay? But they asked me to speak about the 60s and the Jews. Obviously, I'm going to pick some aspect of the 60s Jews. Otherwise, you know me. If I spend 15 years on 1 year, how am I going to talk about the decade? So I plan to speak about Oberstein and the Jews during the 1960s. I have plenty of material in the where I went to operate with. Okay. That's right. We're going to see that. Yeah. I want a picture of him with his Nehru jacket and his whatever. Not that anybody knows. Ray. Well, this audience will know. If I would tell my children, what's a bell bottom? Yeah. Okay. I'm shocked it doesn't fit. Anyway, now we move on for Old People's Night. I just want to share with you something. This is very interesting. Martin Gilbert died last week. And yeah. Martin Gilbert, as you know, I know that. Well, hear me out. So we have a Baltimore connection. Our own Avi Noam, who's sitting here right among us, was a personal friend of Sir Martin Gilbert. He worked as secretary for a while. It's just interesting. So we have really a Baltimore connection. If you saw online, he was a member of Orthodox Shul in London. Okay? And he's a rare case of a historian who was a Jewish Jew. You understand? It's hard to fight the battle against the whole academic world, which is so, in Europe especially, which is so anti-Semitic and certainly anti-Israel and anti-Zionist, and it takes a lot of guts for a person to say, this is where I stand, you're all wrong, I'm right, and I'll prove it to you with 50 books, right? And I'm just talking off the top, right? Well, they weren't all about Israel, only 50. But nevertheless, it's something. You know who's like this also? Simon Schama. Now, he's not as great a historian quite perhaps as Martin Gilbert. We could debate that. But he also, and he knows nothing about Judaism, but I saw, he said on this series, which was a very vapid series, but he says, I'm a Zionist. And that takes a lot of guts nowadays in the BBC to come out with that. So I think that it's interesting that we have this Baltimore connection. I'm hoping Rabbi Noam will write it up. I think that brings us to actually what we're here for tonight, I think. Okay? And so let me begin. Tonight is the 14th out of 14 lectures. Ben Gurion era at high noon, Israel and the Jews, 1957 to 61. Tonight is the 14th lecture, which is a little bit of a different nature then and now. Reflections on how the events of then, 57 to 61, affect us now in the year 2015. So here I'm departing a little bit because when I'm talking about the past, I know what I'm talking about. When I didn't talk about the present, maybe. When I talk about the future, is a guess. So you're all here to hear my guesses and ramblings. Having said that, I proceed. And of course, we understand we start with the fact that Ben Gurion left an ambiguous legacy. I'm talking about now that we've gone into this in some detail, not a lot, but some detail. And he left an ambiguous legacy. There were some big, huge accomplishments, obviously. I mean, look at this. Founding the state of Israel was no small beans, of course. But he also left some gigantic problems that were left unsolved, and perhaps they're unsolvable. Okay? There are problems that he solved, such as the establishment of state and of an army and all that. And then there are problems that he didn't solve. For one thing, plus the change pour le même chose. The Arab-Israeli conflict is still with us today, but it's a lot messier. By that I mean, Ben Gurion, in his time, never articulated his end game. And this is either a plus or a minus, but it's left a lot of policies. What exactly is the goal, territorially, for example, of the state of Israel? Do they want the 67 borders? Do they want more? How much more? When and where, why, under what circumstances? All the time that he was in there, he never, said clearly. On the one hand, right? On the one hand, he said, that the state of Israel, the borders of 48 do not comprehend the totality of the rights of the Jewish people to Eretz Yisrael. On the other hand, he also made many statements, especially after 56, which is, we have enough. You understand? Many times he said we could fit a couple million Jews into what we got now. We could fit all 12 million Jews in the world, 13 million Jews in the world into Israel, particularly the Negev. You understand? And that, it's not in there. So we're always left, if you're a Ben Gurionist or someone aware of this legacy. I mean, is this the ideal border, what I'm pointing to over here? That's the old 67 border green line? Are you into favor of this, that Israel should hold on everything they had in 67, which was like an empire, is literally a greater Israel? Are you into the current thing in which they have the Golan Heights, and you feel the Golan Heights should be part of Israel? Right? In other words, do you say that there should be a peace today going literally back to the 67 borders? Or do you say there are certain halakim, certain pieces that we should hold on to, even if it means that there's no peace treaty? Ben Gurion was not consistent. I'm going to show you right now in a second. Now it's in Hebrew, but it has Hebrew subtitles, so maybe it'll help some of you, but I'll tell you out loud. It's this very interesting long interview that the three reporters had with Ben Gurion in 1970 after the Six Day War. And they said, are you in favor of a peace? Yes, betach, in favor of peace, all the rest of it. And should they give up everything? And basically he said they can give back everything except Yerushalayim and the Golan. And you'll see, he says, Hayiti Oved Chaklai, he said, when I came to Palestine in 1906, I was an agricultural worker below the Golan Heights in the Galilee. I never went up there. I only went up there after we captured it in 67. He said, Elohim Adim, dear great God, how did we live, under those guns and all the rest of it? And based on that, he doesn't want to give it back. But on the other hand, talking on TV is one thing. If push really came to shove, would he give it back? Would he not? The very ambiguity that I'm speaking about is his legacy. And this ambiguity has tremendously complicated Israeli politics, the right versus the left versus the center. As you know, there's an election going on at this very moment, and nobody from Bibi or anything is clear. The only ones that are clear are at the margins, correct? The marginal parties on the left, like the Arabs, say go back to the borders of 1867, they wait a second. The parties of the right, they say they want the map, of Greater Israel at least, all right? And in the middle, that's the Ben-Gurionist legacy. So take a look at this 2 or 3 minute segment of Ben-Gurion's interview. Go. Is Yerushalayim Yeharg Val Yavor? Let's say we can make a real peace. I worked in the Galilee. The artillery could shoot down. The Arabs have no skill because they could have. Why didn't they blow us up when we were in the Golan? By the way, this is just a trivial matter I can't help dropping. That's a lie. He was in the Golan before 48. Right? I mean, because Kim Roosevelt, the CIA guy, took him up there before around 1945, 46, and wrote in his memoirs. But who cares? Now, anyhow, but the Arab-Israeli conflict is not exactly the same anymore. And it got messier, as I said, for the following reason. During the late 50s, when we were starting this year, during the Nasser era, the conflict was between states, right? I mean, this is the old map that we were used to. It's Israel versus Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, say Iraq, these are countries. So it's what you call an army. You're dealing with somebody. Nasser was the personification of the new independent Arab state. Hear what I said? State. Something that had not existed for 1,000 years. I explained that earlier this year. There had not been an Arab independent state. This was a heady experience. That's why Nasser always was these crowds are not rent-a-crowd, These are, they have that too in the Middle East. He had real crowds. That's because he looked like a great and glorious, something that had never existed for a long, long time. Okay? It was the heyday of Arab nationalism. There was tremendous optimism in the 50s in the Arab world, late 50s. Nasserism was a real powerful movement that existed as an idealistic movement throughout the Arab world. In other words, people were Nasserists in Egypt, in Iraq, in North Africa, in Sudan, all over the place. The Ba'athist party, as you see, Michel Aflaq, the famous theoretician, who was a Christian Arab. And nevertheless, he is the exponent and the articulator, was very popular in all these different countries. There should be one giant Arab state, and the Arab state, as I keep emphasizing the point, political state. There's France, there's Italy, there's Germany, there's also Syria, there's also Egypt, there's also Iraq. This was a new experience, and they thought that the glorious future of the Arabs lies in this, what you and I are familiar with, the Western state type of model, okay? Arab nationalism defined itself in terms of states. At that time, there were no failed states anywhere in the world. We forget this. The good old 50s that we thought was so bad, and were bad in some states, is a lot better than now in some respects. You didn't have this business like you have now. Africa and Asia full of countries, no failed states, and therefore the Arab terrorists move in and take over, or it falls under the African drug lords and this, like Somalia and all that. Didn't exist at that time. You understand? Anywhere. Now, this gave a certain traditional, even a rational character to the Arab-Israeli conflict. There are clear rules in symmetrical warfare. There's this thing called a battlefield. There's rules of the game that permit one army to destroy another army in the context of a battlefield. I mean, this is the personification, Dayan is the personification of the old system of war between states. There's the Egyptian army in the Sinai desert, and you beat them or destroy them. There's the Jordanian army in the West Bank, and you beat them or destroy them. There's such a thing called a war, and then it's such a thing called a surrender or not a surrender, and it's a prisoner is a war, is rules, you understand? And believe it or not, both sides more or less kept to the rules. Today, this is no longer the case in 2015. Israel does have to worry about state actors, but more and more, its worries and problems stem from non-state actors and from asymmetrical warfare, right? Here's the picture of today. Who do you fight with? Israel doesn't know what to do. Is a group in Gaza, for example, or Hezbollah in Lebanon, or these other groups in Al-Qaeda and other places, or ISIS, and where are they? You know, it's like punching at a shadow. You know, they hide among civilians, as we all know. And if you shoot back at them, you hit civilians, and then it gets on CNN, and you're tried by the World Court, as we all know. So this is the introduction to Israel, what's called asymmetrical warfare. You see? In which it's not Moshe Dayan's time anymore. And the truth of the matter is, Israel is in the learning process, as is the United States and everybody else, on how to operate in asymmetrical warfare, and it's very hard. I mean, you can always bomb the heck out of anybody. That works. But it seems you can't do that now. Even though Israel has huge problems and growing problems, asymmetrical warfare, in the background there always hovers the symmetrical threat. Here's the classic picture we learned in our history. We always with the Viet Cong, baloney. The Viet Cong was a shadow. The real thing was when the Americans got weak and pulled out, the regular army, the North Korean army moved in and took over the whole country. Meaning there was the real threat was not for the asymmetrical drove the Americans crazy and drove us out of the country because they bombed we all remember this. Or if you don't remember, you read about it. It was a certain type of terrorism, political warfare. But Lamaisa, the one who really won was the North Korean army. So the same thing over here is that the Hamas, for example, can't take over Israel, but they can mess it up, and then some other regular Arab army, like the Egyptian army, for example, can take over Israel. The asymmetrical nature of the struggle problematizes the entire Dimona project. Okay, Ben Gurion, as we learned, went through great trouble in the late 50s, early 60s to put together the A-bomb. And he certainly led the foundation during this period, although technically the A-bomb came in 66. But what was the idea of the atomic bomb? When you're fighting against state actors, so basically, you won't shoot at me because I can shoot at you. For example, let's say Egypt got the atomic bomb, God forbid. So then Israel said like this, well, if they nuke Tel Aviv, we do Cairo and Alexandria and the Aswan Dam, and that's the end of Egypt. So that's called the balance of terror. When I was young, they called it Mad Men, mutual assured destruction. You understand? But what if you're dealing with a Hezbollah or something like that? First of all, they're crazy, they don't care. Second of all, they'll pull out. In other words, the land you're shooting at is not their land. So can Israel, for example, nuke Lebanon? The Lebanese said, what are you doing to us for? And Israel said, well, you have these guys in there. It's not us. You understand what I'm saying? Third of all, if that's true, there's nothing to stop the Hezbollah or the ISIS. I mean, God forbid. What ISIS or some group like that throws an A-bomb at Israel. What do you do in return? I'm asking you a question. What do you do? You see, there's nobody you can point a finger to. The United States of America deals with this problem now with the Al-Qaeda and all these other groups. You don't know who to shoot. If it was Saddam Hussein, they thought that was a government. So that's a war. But when a guy's in and out running over here, and the world has not yet come to the conclusion, which it's going to have to, which is that we have to change the rules of warfare, And as an American general said not that long ago, he said, we're going to have to go back to the Old Testament. You understand? And the reason is because the West, doesn't know what to do. And after a while, they'll say, listen, if it means, wiping out the Middle East, that's what we're going to do. Although I don't really think that's going to happen. And so what do you do? We have to come up with a new model of warfare, the likes of which have not existed in a very, very long time. So I'm just trying to point out how difficult the whole situation is. As to the Arab optimism of 1957, 61, that's all gone. Okay? We are living through a time, as you know, when the Arab states are either disintegrating or they're battling against disintegration. True? Egypt is a real country, but we all know Egypt is constantly going through these riots all the time. And the public doesn't like a lot of things, and who knows where it's going to go. I always told you this, they call it Wednesday, This is the way it's, and Egypt, by the way, is the only Arab country that's a genuine country. I mentioned this earlier. Egypt has an actual national state tradition. Syria is invented by the British and the French. Same thing with Lebanon. Winston Churchill, as we all know, famously created Jordan, right? Gertrude, what's her name? Was it Gertrude Bell? Created Iraq. You know what I'm saying? These are all brand new. Therefore, they have no staying power, which is what the ISIS and all those groups are all against. Egypt is Egypt. Egypt was around before Abraham, correct? There was pharaohs. There really was a country. And so yet Egypt is battling disintegration. So if that's true of Egypt, Kal v'chomer of Saudi Arabia, of Yemen, and of all the other countries, the Sudan, they're full of different groups that want to destroy everything over there. Nasser, but then again, it's not so simple, because Nasserism, of all things, the late 50s, have made a comeback in Egypt, which, as I say, is the only Arab state with a national identity, and which is the only Arab state that has ethnic homogeneity, as I'll show you in a minute. There are two groups in Egypt. There's the Sunnis and the Copts. And they don't like each other, but they're both Egyptian. So the ethnicity is the same. So look at this. This guy is literally taking the page from his book. Sisi, that is what he's doing. He's bringing back an Egyptian semi-socialist, semi-fascist kind of regime. He's killing the heck out of the Muslim Brotherhood. He's trying to make Egypt, once again, a nationally important sort of thing, and press the button of Egyptian, not Muslim, Egyptian nationalism. He's a Muslim, but he's not in favor of all these other groups because they want to overthrow him. It's a weird, restoration of the Nasserist regime. Mutatis mutandis, meaning but it's a new day and has to adjust. So Nasser, a key part of his identity was no peace with Israel. Times have changed. So a key part of Sisi is, although he doesn't like it, is peace with Israel. But it's Nasserism under a new kind of reality, and you always have to worry about Karl Marx, who said the first time it becomes a tragedy, second time a farce. So he's fighting that it shouldn't turn into a farce, which leads the Middle East, when you look back in perspective, have they gone forward or have they gone backwards, in a very kind of difficult to analyze state. Little by little, the Arabs and everybody else is coming to realize that in the Arab world, whether you like it or not, the two options are dictatorship or Hobbesian chaos. Remember Hobbes said very famously, it's the war. Life is a war of everybody against everybody. What is Syria, if not that? Doesn't this fit Iraq? Right? Doesn't this fit more and more Lebanon? If you know and you follow the news, and I know you do, isn't this Yemen? Isn't Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states sitting on this? And in long term, even Iran has a lot of minorities, they don't talk about it, and they're sitting on all this. And what is the alternative if the state that's there at the moment is overthrown? It's Hobbes. It's everybody against everybody. As I say, just look to Syria for a model. The Sunnis want to kill the Alawites want to kill the Druze, everybody wants to kill the other one, this and this and this. The Hezbollah is coming in for this one, the Russians are bringing in that one. You need a scorecard. There's a book I read a week or two ago, I mentioned in Shul, a guy called Inside Syria, from some Jewish reporter who's actually very pro-Arab, Ehrlich, I think his name is, and he literally had a scorecard, a 3 or 4 page business at the end, in which you have to keep who's who, is the Arab army of Syria, the Syrian army of the Arabs, the Arab-Syrian army. Each one is a different group fighting the other. And so if this is the situation, then we're not back to the 50s, right? From Israel's point of view, I would not like to be in charge of the defense ministry, the general staff, and try to keep track of all this and know what does this mean in terms of the. Once upon a time, it was easy. There's Nasser's army, there's King Hussein's army, there's Syria army, and that's not what you got to worry about. You see? And now it's much, much more difficult and complicated. This certainly stumps American policy, correct? The United States does not know what to do. we like to think in terms of Thomas Jefferson, and how can you do that? And they say we want to back the Democratic side in Syria, we want to back the Democratic side in Iraq, we want to back the Democratic side in Kuwait. Ain't none. You know what I'm saying? No, this is the problem. In other words, if there is any group like that, it's 3 professors perhaps, and they have no traction. And so the United States is also trying to face what you call a paradigm shift. They have to come up with a new model for foreign policy. Lamaisa, they might go back to Thomas Jefferson, which is just pay him off or fight him or something like that, Or I should say George Washington, who said, don't even fight the pirates, just pay them and, do business and let them all kill each other. I don't know. Is it possible to make peace? Hear what I'm saying. Is it possible to make peace with ISIS? Is it possible to make peace with Al-Qaeda? Well, if it's not, will the West bankrupt itself in a war of destruction against them? I mean, where do we go? War costs a lot of money. Are we going to go broke on this? Is it possible for the West to go Old Testament on them? If not, what's the plan? Is it endless war? Will the West form a Cossack class or a Croat class? In European history, let's go to the next one. Here's a map of, let's say, 1700. Here's the Turkish Empire, here's the Muslims. Oh, wherever their borders are, here's Poland and Austria-Hungary. Wars were going over hundreds of years, all through the 1500s, all through the 1600s, all into the 1700s, into early 1800s. During this time, the Muslims raid into here, they raid back, and that was life for 300 years. So what it meant was that on the borders, where I'm pointing with my pointer over here, here they had the Croats, the Pandurs, who were Meshuggahim working for the Habsburgs, and they learned, just like the Turks, massacred and cut the bodies up and did all kind of things. So they did that to them. The Cossacks were what the Poles came up with, same idea, which was they should be as vicious as the Muslims are to them. And for hundreds of years, A raided B and roasted them, toasted them, sliced them, baked them slowly over fires, at 300 degrees and so forth. And that's happened. And vice versa, and that's how life was lived. Are we going to, it looks like we may be heading in that direction, in which it's not exactly a Cossack class order, but you have now non-draft armies, and so little by little, the special forces, whatever you call them, and they're going to learn, we're going to be in a world in which they raid this side and cause all kind of terrible things, and then the West goes back and does that to them, and, I mean, is that the plan? It kind of looks like it. In the long run, the only peace will be by a highly fractionated Middle East. I'm looking very down the line. Divided into ethnic and religious enclaves, freely federated into some kind of a common market, but that's a long way off. Look at the Middle East. Each one of these is a different group. Right? Think about that. Each one is a different group, including down here. It's the Sunnis, it's the Shiites, it's the Kurds, it's the Druze, it's the this, it's the that, and the other one. You literally need a scorecard to follow who the things are. Look at Iran, by the way, and what an ethnic mess it is. And look what phonies the Iranians are to say this is the Persian Empire, we want to restore Iran's glory, all the rest of it. They're suppressing all their minorities, and look at the Turks, those liars. Okay? These are the Kurds that the Turks are oppressing. Everything you read in the Middle East is full of baloney. And how's it? Like I say, 100 years from now, if anybody's still left, maybe it'll figure to stop fighting and unite in the United States and the Middle East. Maybe. Chances are not, because it's more fun just to wipe out the other guy. Then you don't have to count them in the final drawing. So we're back to the Humphrey Bogart movies. With the Treasure Sierra Madre. 4 guys find the gold and they all kill each other, right? Because each one figures, correct? He says, if I get rid of, we only have to divide it 4 ways. Now we only have to divide it 3 ways. Now we only divide it 2 ways. And now it's only me. And then if I shoot myself, I don't have to share it with me either. So this is the Middle East. You understand? And I know it sounds funny, but you're laughing with a nervous laugh because you know it's true. You see? And this is where Israel is stuck. The good Lord has a sense of humor, I guess, but this is where we're stuck. Now, the thing is that this is precisely what groups like ISIS are out to prevent. They're going to kill the other groups so they don't have to make a united group with them. This is happening right now. Here they're cutting a guy's head off. I just got this off of YouTube, right? And I could give you worse. He's only the beginning of the process. It's happening as we speak. Is the world really stopping them? Right? If they stay in their own neighborhoods and they only kill the Yazidis or something like that, nobody's saying a word. We live in genocidal times, and the average person in the United States or Europe says like this: just don't involve me. Neville Chamberlain, peace in our time, weiter. So, interestingly, by the way, These internecine wars have temporarily deflected attacks away from Israel. Isn't that funny? Osama bin Laden said, first we got to get rid of America, then we move to Israel. First we get rid of big Satan, then get rid of small Satan. Now obviously he wanted to kill Israel at the end, but Lamaisa, when he was around, the Al-Qaeda concentrated their attacks on America and Britain and European countries. And so in a weird way, Israel has had a certain amount of a respite. I don't know how long it's going to last. There's a certain amount of respite for the last, I would say, 10 years or so, because they have bigger fish to fry. We have to deal with Hamas, with Fatah, with the Palestinians, you understand? But the larger groups are, as you know, ISIS is busy doing its thing all the way up north in Syria. I mean, the situation can change any time. But it's quite different than in the period we were studying, quite different than in the Nasser era. So what's the plan? President Obama, what's the plan? Yeah, no, seriously. I'm not saying to be funny. I'm saying it's a bad deck of cards. You know, what is the plan? Oh, everybody says, we can only go back to the gold days of Palmerston when England ran the show, and then they simply played one group off against the other, you know? And when people got into trouble, they just blew it all up. I mean, you know, go back. Well, that's not going to happen. You know, that was the 19th century. At least I don't see it happening. And they were relatively helpless against England. That is what England did. They looked at the rest of the world, especially Africa and Asia. They say there's always going to be three groups out to kill each other and a fourth group. And so you just give gold to this group to kill that group. When this gets too much, you pay them off. That's exactly how Palmerston operated in those days. As we saw, he was actually sympathetic to the Jews. But, you know, that was a quirk of his. England ruled a gigantic empire by doing these kind of imperialistic shtick, as they call it. The biggest difference of all, of course, now is that you have these relatively large state actors, and I'm talking about Iran and Turkey. You know, what's going to be with them? They're already a different order of fish. These are two countries that work for the moment. I don't know if they'll work tomorrow, but they work for the moment. And they, as you know now, are getting involved big time in the Arab-Israeli conflict. They were not there in 1957. In fact, in Ben-Gurion's time, both of these countries were allied to Israel in one form or another. Is that true? You know, secretly, and maybe they meant it, maybe they didn't mean it, but the Mossad was there big time, and secret other trade and things like that were going on big time, because they were afraid of Nasser, as I tried to explain earlier. And now, the big difference in the Arab-Israeli conflict is these two are publicly and viciously aligned against Israel and are using their muscle against us, especially Turkey under this Mamzer over here. So now, Hamas and Hezbollah are there, and we didn't have those to worry about it in the past. Both of them enabled by Iran, without whom they would be weak, right? And, you know, you see these guys would get nowhere if the Iranians didn't give them everything, but the Iranians are more than happy to give everything because, to be frank, the Iranians now are trying to play Palmerston. That's what's going on. And that's exactly what's happening. And they're doing a very successful job. They're playing one group against the other. They're what's the expression, biting Israel all the time, you know, a little here, a little there, a little there, and nothing is happening to them. So they're mamish playing Palmerston. On the other hand, Zeh Luma Zeh, there's always, you know, counter forces. God has, as I say before, his way of disposing of issues, and he invented the Kurds, right? Who at this moment, as you see last week, the Barzanis were over kissing up with Kerry. And so really, aren't we talking about the 19th century, right? Where you need a scorecard who's who. And, I mean, how many people in America have the slightest idea what we're talking about tonight? You get it? And how many people care the slightest bit? And yet, the Kurds represent possibly the best chance for Israel, because they might crush these other guys, set up a state, and they're not particularly anti-Israel. So you see that as we compare what happened in the period we were talking about in the 50s, it was a very dangerous time, but it seems a lot less dangerous compared to what we have today. How about Eretz Yisrael itself, Israel today? Is Israel today the Israel Ben-Gurion's time? Of course not. But there are many legacies, good and bad, which remain in economics. Ben-Gurion and the Mapai left an ambiguous economic legacy. True? I mean, Eshkol and these guys, they ran into straight line over here. In the good old or bad old Mapai days, the government controlled everything. It was a highly subsidized economy. They depended on getting money from Germany and from America and places like that. The businesses were run on a non-economic basis, as I said before. But on the other hand, they did build an infrastructure. That's a fact. And they did also build, I would say, an educational infrastructure. Now, Israel has good schools to teach technology and things of this nature. And so they did lay the foundation for Israel to make a leap forward, but it didn't happen until much, much later, till the 90s, as you know. And even today, when they've privatized and that sort of thing to a certain degree, the Israeli economy is the opposite of well-balanced and organized, because there's so much poverty, as I'm sure everybody knows. I know you all follow the news. Political parties are running on this. Israel has embraced semi-capitalism, neoliberalism as it's called. Let's go back one. No, right there. Netanyahu, as you know, is finance minister, privatized a lot, but not all of it. And even the ones he privatized, you have now the problem of vulture capitalism. And so I'm sure you follow that 9 families control the Israeli economy, as the shchitut, as they call it, the corruption. And it's not simply that, it stifles the necessary advances in the economy. There are a lot of things that could be done, and they don't get done because people block them from being done. The government, under the influence of these powerful family cartels, puts a lot of artificial regulations in the way of businessmen doing what they need to do to grow their business, unless you're on the right side of the 9 families. So it means the 9 families have replaced Ben Gurion, or Eshkol, to be more exact. So that's not good either. You understand? In other words, they don't really have a level playing field, as it's called. They don't really expose a lot of the businesses, the large corporations, to risk, because that's what the essence of capitalism is. If you're not doing well, you got to go under. And they won't do that. Now, it's natural for capitalism to operate in this way. We have in this country, already in the late 1800s, they started antitrust, and that whole business, the federal, whatever it's called, the Interstate Commerce Commission and that sort of thing, we all know from American history, to try to maintain a capitalist system, but doing away at least with the worst elements of those which stifle competition. Here we have machlokes, already 100 years old, between Teddy Roosevelt and Louis Brandeis. Right? Teddy Roosevelt being in favor of big corporations and all that, and Brandeis said, no, you want small corporations. The big corporations are naturally going to crush the competition and try to change the rules always to fit themselves. You all understand what I'm saying? Capitalists are not in favor of capitalism. Capitalists are in favor of capitalism until they get rich. Then they want their monopoly to be respected by the government. In Israel, you have this problem today. And so on the one hand, certain sectors are doing well, like the high tech, and that enables Israel to do well in certain areas. And other ones go under, and the fact you have unemployed people, or tremendously low payment, and hunger, and things of this nature. And as I mentioned this morning in my show, Barak said 10 years ago, he said, everybody in Israel is prepared to take something out of the refrigerator and give to the hungry people. No, they don't quite get it. And these are all parts of the Ben Gurion legacy. Now, in Ben Gurion's time, the attitude of the Mapai was, we don't want rich, but we want equal, you see? And therefore, we'd rather not have all these millionaires, but we want everybody to get the basics. But when they were living on the basic, it was very small also, very small margin. And so, you can afford bread and milk and cheese and a few other things, but that's all. And so it's very complicated. Obviously, economics is incredibly complicated. And in the 21st century, with the high tech and the international trade problems and the IMF and the World Bank and all the rest of it, it's very problematic. We all know European countries are going under, for example, all the time. We all know that this country is very shaky, as we all know. And so where is it going to go with Israel? Ben Gurion didn't leave Israel with a sound economic structure able to manage it on its own. And so this guy, Yair Lapid, is now the finance minister. He spoke real high before the last election, but then when he ran into reality, he's become very unpopular, and perhaps many of us forgotten. A year ago, they had these tent cities in Israel, and what's that all about? And by the way, what did the tent people want? They just said, the government should give us more money. So that's not a solution either, you see? And so the kind of fundamental thinking from the bottom up didn't take place in Ben Gurion's time, and surprisingly, 60 years later, it's not taking place today. It's just interesting to note. Let's move on to the next one. As I say, Israel does have things beyond the Ben Gurion era. All this represents, as I say, the active sector, and there's no question. I mean, like I say, you don't have to be an economist to know that startup and high tech is the wave of the future. Correct? That's where it's going to be in the 21st century. It's brain power, all the rest of it. That's absolutely true. But that's not all. And that's what I'm trying to tell. Not everybody in Israel is in the high tech, and not everybody in Israel is a brainy graduate of the Technion that'll build a company and sell for $100 million. There's a few like that, you understand? Most people are really struggling. As I'm sure we have friends, we have relatives in Israel. The prices go up, and where's it going? You understand? In Ben Gurion's time, the prices were artificially controlled. But that, of course, led to a black market. And so what's going to be? How do you cut subsidies without killing the poor, without causing greater unemployment? There is the problem. Now, as I say, some parts of the economy have been deregulated, but other parts will still struggle with overregulation and these corrupt monopolies. And you have a lot of other factors modifying or messing up regular economic kind of planning. For a long time, Israel had cheap Arab labor, which fueled the economy and iced out Jews. In other words, one of the things that happened after the 67 war, and every war always has unintended consequences. I don't know of any war that ever ended, think about what I'm about to say, because this is actually thought-provoking. I don't think I know of any war in history that ever ended the way the people who started the war thought it would. Okay? Let me just give you one dumb example, World War II, right? Nobody thought it'll end with Stalin and then communism and all that kind of stuff, right? They thought it'll go back to 1939 just without Hitler. It never works that way, you see? And so, when Israel won in 67, one of the things that happened was you have this huge pool of cheap Palestinian labor. That messes up the Ben Gurion economy, because in the period that we were studying this past year, there were only Jews in Israel for the most part, and that powerfully affected the economic decision-making process, you see? If there was a problem, maybe labor was overpaid, from a purely economic point of view. And then in 67, legally or not legally, like here, legally or not, the Mexicans, they took in, what I'm talking about, all the construction workers and all this sort of thing got in. Israel got used to this dangerous brew of taking cheap foreign labor that's illegal. Now it's Romanians and Thais and Africans, etc. But Zionism, as we've seen, is ultimately incompatible with pure Adam Smith. True? Zionism is, how do you make it work? I mean, from day one, Israel was not economically viable. If they would go by Adam Smith, they couldn't have started in 48. They couldn't have started in Herzl's time. And so how is it going to work out? These are all part of the ambiguous legacies left over from Ben Gurion. Israel cannot simply go neoliberal and mess over the poor. That's not an option. There is look, there's a guy sleeping on the floor, right? There's tremendous poverty in Israel. You can't totally ignore it. The middle class in Israel, as I showed you in that cartoon last week or whatever it was, is trying to ignore it. Remember that ad? Maybe you saw it yourself now if you went online. The shkufim, right? That the Shas is trying to say, we're not worried about the ma'amad benoni, we're worried about the shkufim. The ma'amad benoni is the middle class. Middle class in Israel is complaining, and I understand that, no question about it. But they're doing pretty good. And the people under them, just walk by them. I mean, when you go to Israel, when I go to Israel, you walk right by it. You understand? And therefore, that's not a solution just to walk by it if you're a tourist. But if you live there, where is it going to go? Another big problem is left over is from the Ben Gurion era. I would say, in my personal opinion, this is the worst legacy, and that is this Mapai economy created a black market, which is a mentality. So today you don't have a black market in terms of you have to go and change your money at a different rate, although we do that, but it's basically the same. On the other hand, the black market mentality, once it gets in the public, is responsible for huge tax evasion. Look at this thing over here. Israelis held $10 billion overseas, offshore accounts. And there's a lot more than that. They just discovered this the other day. And this whole article, goes on to say this, which means that if I've seen these following numbers, which you may find surprising, or knowing Jews, you may not find surprising, but if Israel collected half of what's out there, you know what I'm saying? In other words, there's what people pay in taxes, then there's the other stuff. So now I'm talking about the other stuff. If they collected half of what's out there, they have tripled the revenue. So you could solve the labor problems. You could solve the food problems. You could solve the defense problems. You wouldn't need a penny from Obama. And it's in Israel. They'll never get it. At least not with the culture we have. Because ever since 1948 or something like that, we all know this. What are we talking about? You do this under the table, you do this over here, you do this there, it's a cash, it's bash, tash, right? This can kill a country. You understand? This can kill a country. It's the worst legacy from the Mapai period, because it just became part of who you are, that there's, all the jokes. There's 5 sets of books, one you don't even show yourself, all the other things like that. Imagine when you have an Israeli Romanian, a very Hungarian, married to this. The IRS doesn't stand a chance, So, and they have it over here, and who knows where they have it. It's funny, but it's not funny, correct? In other words, what I just pointed to over here is a huge problem, and they're not trying to fix it. I mean, the American Jews, I'm not saying to do this, but the American Jews could say to Israel, what are you coming to hit me out for money? You have a wealth of money in Israel. Just go do your job. You see what I'm saying? You need a penny from the United States. Because if you hear what I said, they could triple, these are what economists say, they could triple their revenues. So just for argument's sake, let's say Israel makes, I'm just making this up, let's say Israel makes 20 billion in taxes. They can make 60 billion. So with an extra 40 billion, you wouldn't have people sleeping on the street if you wished. You could do revolutions in economy. You could do, you use your imagination, okay? And yet nobody's doing anything about it. It's funny how culture, but I always study, it's funny how culture guides everything. I'll just talk off the top of my head. Israel has a problem, there's not enough Jews. That's true. They can have more kids. The government doesn't even make a campaign to encourage Israeli families, Jewish families to have more kids. I'm talking about the Chilonim. You understand? The Haredim, they say, it's terrible having kids. What's your plan if you're trying to grow your country, especially in the Middle East? They won't think in those terms. So culture gets in the way of logical and clear thinking. Isn't it funny that way? You understand? Other countries have the same problem. Russia, for example, has an underpopulation, if you know. And they've had it ever since 1930 or thereabouts. Because if you got Stalin, he kills 10 million people every 5 minutes. It'll happen. The Russia never made any till today. If they ever build an apartment, it's this big. So what are you sending out as a cultural message? You understand? It doesn't make any sense. But culture is culture, and Israel has that. The money given to the yeshivas doesn't need to be a problem if the government had any efficiency in tax collection, right? No, they're worried they're giving too much money. Yeshivas not as much in college. If they had the extra 40 billion, so to speak, you wouldn't have any problems in that area whatsoever. And is anybody speaking about that? Do you ever hear any of these people talking about what I just said? Okay? This guy, Bennett, might be the next finance minister. This guy is the current finance minister. As you all know, these guys are running for prime minister. Does anybody ever say, hey, you know something? The problem is what we have in our own yard. Remember the Hasidic tale that the guy's looking for the pot of gold, and where was it? Remember, you know that story, right? That's Israel. Except it's not funny. Now, but seriously, just imagine Israel did not need to raise money in America. I mean, this is our goal, that I should go to raise money in Israel for America. Wouldn't that be nice? Right? TA could use some money, Near Israel could use some money. Hertzberg could get rich, I'm telling you, of relatives in Israel. Anyway, it's there. That's my point. It's there. Now, don't be skeptical about this. Israel 6 years ago was admitted to the OECD, right? OECD, which is one of 34 countries, which are basically the only successfully operating economies in the world. The OECD started at the end of World War II, and it's all your Western nations. And you have to have certain standards to get in. This includes the US, Western Europe, countries like Brazil, Japan, countries like that. And Israel 8-10 years ago was admitted, which means that they have the wherewithal, but you're still going to have people sleeping on the streets. Thus, the foundations for Israel's progress, as well as the foundations for Israel's economic regress, were laid in the 50s. Okay? So we have the positive and the negative legacies of the two fellows, who were the czars and the total rulers of the Israeli economy in the period that we were studying. Now we move to another area, and that's the Israeli Arabs. It's 1.7 million. Okay? It's not 170,000 as it was in Ben Gurion's time. It's 10 times that. So it's 1.7 million, and there's no military government anymore. It's not Mimshal Tzvai that they can't go anywhere, and they're under a dictatorship. That's been gone since Eshkol, since the 60s. Ben Gurion simply deferred dealing with them. He maintained the military government his entire time in office. His unspoken, but his attitude was that there's no point in trying to come up with a policy of integration. The Arabs will always hate us, period. Now, maybe he was right, maybe he wasn't right, but this is what his clear policy was. If that's true, right? Let's say Ben Gurion was a realist, and he understood what it is, and the Arabs are the Arabs. I get it. So you want to talk like that? So then what happens is they get bigger and bigger, and more hostile. What's the plan? Okay? You know who these people are. They're members of the Knesset. They're vitriolic. They get worse and worse as time goes on. If they'll come out openly if it's legal, and they'll say Israel should be destroyed. You know that. And now through stupid Israeli laws, they're making a big party of 12. I know you follow that. Israel has a long history of making these laws, and they never think 2 steps ahead. Do you remember, for example, 10, 50 years ago, they made a law for direct election of the prime minister? And the idea was to deny the Haredi party so much influence in the government. And it had the opposite effect, because both of the people running for prime minister had to kiss up to the Haredi in order to get elected. So no, why didn't the big smart professors in poli-sci in Ben Gurion University and Tel Aviv University think about that? They're stupid, that's all. So you see it, okay? So here also they said we're going to jack up the rate so you can't have a party that doesn't have 3%. So that forces all the small parties to disappear. No, it doesn't. It forces the small parties to join together and make a big party. So what was the genius of that? Now you have a large Arab party of 10%. 12 is out of 120 in the Knesset. Who's the big chacham that thought that one up? Sure, it's somebody that has a lot of degrees at the end of his name. You understand? Including STUPID, you know. So I mean, what is the plan? And seriously, I mean, look at this. Here is Israel's national anthem. Read the words. What is Ahmed Tibi? I mean, you know, what do you expect? Are the Arabs really going to feel comfortable saying that? To be perfectly honest. Now let me go the other way. So you want to change Hatikva? You know, so what do you want it to be? Get my point? Now I'm sure you know that some in Israel now have what they call the Jewish State Party, or the law that they want to that Israel's a Jewish state, and they want to, which means that this should stay the national anthem. That's a core element of what it's all about. First of all, they're not going to pass that law. But second, even if they pass the law, I get it. So what happens when the Arabs are 2 million and 3 million and 4 million? Do you honestly think they're going to think, Cholod b'leiv nefesh Yehudi homi? I mean, you know, what is that? You get it? And so all I'm trying to say is like this. If there's no plan, that's also no good, correct? But on the other hand, what is the plan? Good and bad? Now, Kahanas, they kick him out. Okay, but that's not going to happen. And so what do you know, he's the only guy with a plan. It's not, that's not a plan. So what is the plan? All right? And again, this is one of those things that Ben Gurion basically kicked the ball down the road. He says, I can't solve this. Maybe in the future they will. But they didn't. The basic problem is the reality of Zionist unilateralism. One of the words I'm going to be using tonight a lot is unilateralism, okay? The Arabs say like this: we never agreed l'chachila there should be a Zionist movement. We never agreed that any Jew should move over here. We never agreed there should be a state of Israel. We got stuck by the 48 borders. We're in here. We still hold where we hold back in 1948, 47. Why do we have to agree with Israel? You understand? And we want Israel to disappear tomorrow. Like, the whole thing was a mistake. The Zionists never asked our opinion. The Jews never asked our opinion. We're still waiting to express our opinion. And right now we're keeping quiet because we're 1.5 million. We'll wait till you're 2 and 3 and 4 or 5 times. We're having more children than the Jews. So just wait another 20 years or something like that, and see what is Israel's plan to that? What's the Jews' plan to that? They have no plan. You see? And so it turns out to leave this problem festering is not really a great idea. The Arab plan is obviously to wait for inevitable pullout from the West Bank and the establishment of a Palestinian state. Then to go the political action route to join with the West Bank. Okay? In other words, the Arabs' official policy is that Israel should go back to this, which is the borders of death. But even if they make the plan, and turn this West Bank into a Arab state, which is the politically correct plan today. You know what I'm talking about, the Judea and Samaria, if you prefer. Right next to it is the Galil. And the Galil is a massive Arab majority. And so all they're doing is waiting till, let's say, just for argument's sake, here's the scenario. Let's say Herzog wins the elections. He gets along with Obama. They get together. They have a peace conference. And they actually sign a peace treaty. Now you have a Jewish state and you have a Palestinian state. But the Jewish state contains a lot of Arabs. The Arab state doesn't have any Jews. Okay? What happens next? People like Tibi and the others, they say like this. They say, we feel more part of the... After all, are we supposed to sing a song, Cholod b'leiv p'nim nefesh Yehudi homia l'fasei mizrach kadima? That's not us. After all, doesn't the Americans say when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for two nations to dissolve the bonds? Do you know like them? Well, we Arabs say we hold these truths to be self-evident. Okay? And we're entitled to join where we are. Now tell me where the American liberals will be, where the Europeans and all the others will be after the peace treaty is signed. You understand? Now, you think that if they withdraw and make an Arab state in the West Bank, that'll finally put an end to the Arab-Israeli strife. No, it'll just lead to the next item. Because I don't blame them. What I'm saying is not some infernal thing that Dovid Katz is thinking up in this crazy, it's plain on the map. You understand? And so imagine 5 years from now or 10 years from now, whatever you prefer, and you see the news, and he says, oh, marches were held today in Nazareth and in this place and that place, and they say, we want to be over here. And the President of the United States at that time, and they'll say, well, they signed the treaty and all the rest of it, but what will the college students say, right? And what will the professors say? And what will the BBC and all the other and the usual suspects say? They'll say, this is Zionist oppression. They're holding down areas. I mean, after all, the Arabs are a huge majority in this part of the country. And then some Israeli party will say, let's get realistic. Let's have a situation where part of the Galilee belongs to the Arab state, enclaves like Sfat and Tiberia and something like that will be part of the Jewish. Ach and vey. You're going to go back? Let's go back to the earlier map. Yeah, they'll have something like this in mind, right? That's what it'll be. Now, again, is this a doomsday scenario? As far as I can tell, as I said before, this is where it's heading, because nobody has said what are you doing about the 1.7 or soon 2 million Arabs that live in the state of Israel? What is the plan? Okay, and as I say, J Street and others will be on that area. Okay, now other optimistic matters. Another unsolvable problem left over from the 50s, religion. Okay, Ben-Gurion's policy was kick it down the road. He tried. Here's the famous meeting. This is when he put on a hat and went to see the Chazon Ish. This was the Chazon Ish at that time, because you used to have Derech Eretz, going whatever. And this took place in 53, I believe, 52. And wait a second. And he saw at that time. Let me put it this way: he did see where it's heading. He tried to do something about it. It didn't work, and he gave up. He went in 52 to see the Chazon Ish, and he told him, he said, we and the religious, they didn't use the word charedim at that time, we just have to figure out some way to get along. These are the words he used. He said, we have to figure out some modus vivendi. The Chazon Ish basically said, there is no modus vivendi. You understand? His famous thing was, there's a ship that's empty and a ship that's full. And the ship that's empty has to get out of the way for the ship that's full. And what he meant to say is that Orthodox Judaism is a full ship, and secular Zionism is an empty ship. Is empty, which it kind of ideologically kind of proved to be. So I'm talking in the world of ideology now. Now, so in other words, there was no dialogue. That is to say, there was no what shall I say, a meeting of the minds. And Ben-Gurion realized it's a hot potato, but once he saw he can't deal with the Chazon Ish, and there's nobody else that has any kind of influence like that. So for the next 10 years that he was in power, he just deferred it. You understand? He didn't meet with this head on, which is kind of interesting. He realized it was a problem that wouldn't go away. It's not true, as some people assert, that he thought the yeshivas would wither away. He knew that that's not true. But he didn't think it would get traction among the Chilonim, and he certainly was right about that. Okay? There's a few what they call Baal Tshuvas, but most people, this is the culture of, this is not the world of people who are Chozrim b'Tshuvah. Okay? And by the way, these are the only two pictures I could show in the synagogue. Now, so he left this one to his successors. And to chance, and to demography, which was a bad move. Okay? The question of religion reflects, I will argue, a very interesting aspect of the clash of modernity with Judaism. 200 years ago, the millennia-long Kehillah model, thousands of years old, which inhibits extreme behavior, which would lead to secessionism, was replaced with a modern unilateralist model, which chucked the Kehillah in favor of radical unilateralist action, which led to fragmentation. Those are fancy words to say that once upon a time, primacy was given in Jewish culture and among Jews to the community, to the Kehillah idea, and anything that would, it was just taken for granted. Anything that would hurt that was discountenance that wasn't done. That the Kehillah was wedded for thousands of years ago to what we will call today, even though it's not the right word, what we'll call to Orthodox Judaism. You get it? No, that's what the Kehillah was. Now, I don't mean ultra-Orthodox Judaism or something like that, but Shabbos, Kashrus, Tashmish, Shpachah, the basic sorts of things in it, religion as traditionally understood. That is what the Kehillah model was long ago. I've spoken about this in the past. And the very fact that the Kehillah was supposed to apply to all members of the community, even though not all the members of the community are going to be observant, inhibited, as I say before, what shall I say, extreme behavior that would lead to secessionism. The Gemara itself talks about the concept of ein gozring zel atziba im keni rov atziba chol lamabo, which is fancy words of saying already in the Talmudic time, in the pre-Talmudic times, that the Sanhedrin cannot make a rule if most of the people won't abide with it. You can't push it so far. And so in halacha, there always had to be a moderate option, okay? Because that's the only one that can have traction among the broad masses. So I'm speaking about a model, and I spoke about this before, in which you have a Jewish community with a right, a left, and a center, but it's all part of one family. Right, a left, and a center. The right, if I can use that term, could be very frum. It could be called Hasidim, and I don't mean modern Hasidim. Hasidim, they will go for chumras, and that's wonderful. Okay? So they will not be satisfied with kosher, but glad kosher. Nothing wrong with that. But the standard for the community is going to be the one that applies to the middle. You understand? And it's 100% kosher, and all the rest of it, except it doesn't go for the very reason that it emerged as the option in terms of Shabbos, kashrus, mikvah, yontif, all kind of rules. The reason is precisely because the middle of the one is the one that's doable among the tzibur. Now notice, I didn't say very lenient. It's not a left-wing thing either, because that's too much that way. So be in there. And the history of halacha, there is such a thing, and the history of the responsive literature reflects this very wonderfully. It's precisely one in which you see that the posek, as it is totally aware there's only so much you can put out there as normative and demanding halacha, provided that it's within the realms of halacha. Okay? Those who are a little bit learned will know, for example, off the top of my head, that in Hilchos Shabbos there are many things with Bishul and others in which they say really the Olam shouldn't do it, but since they do it and the Shulchan Aruch says okay, so all right, like that. And just again off the top of my head, anybody's familiar with the Mishnah Berurah of the Chafetz Chaim, who of course wrote this in the modern era, not in the pre-modern era. Graphically, the page in the Mishnah Berurah is very interesting because anybody slightly familiar will know there's the Mishnah Berurah part and there's the Bir Halacha part. And very often, the Mishnah Berurah part is the traditionalist part, and the Bir Halacha is the modern and the Orthodox part. And so the Mishnah Berurah is like this. This and this and this is the din. And then the Chafetz Chaim on his own will say, but if you look up all the real sources, really it should be more strict. But what he's saying is like this, but I'm not saying that that's the din. A very good example that comes to the top of my mind is the Eruv. All right? In which he said like this, the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, says you can make an Eruv, as you are familiar with this term. Right? To carry. The Bir Halacha says, if you, for this reason, that reason, you shouldn't use the Eruv. No problem with that. But he's not saying you cannot use the Eruv. You understand? If the Ramah says it's halacha, then it is, and then we all know the Jewish people have a long history of Arabs of one kind or another. If someone has issues with it, that's totally fine. Okay, if you don't want to eat my hechsher or something like that as a personal thing, it's totally fine as long as you don't tell people that it's treif. So all this that I'm just spending on is no, I'm very serious about this. So this is part of the old Kehillah model. Now, what happened in 200 years ago or so was the beginnings of unilateralism. Take, for example, these two guys who are founders of the Reform movement, Germany, USA. They said, the heck with this, we're going to do our thing. And if it leads to the breakup of the community, well, too bad. After all, the community is founded on outmoded principles that cannot stand within the 19th century, and it's going to be going out the window anyway, it'll be gone in a generation, and we're doing it. We're changing the davening, we're changing the tefillos, we're changing, obviously getting rid of all the concept of law as such within Judaism, we're getting rid of circumcision, the whole 9 yards, and this is where we're going. And even though we're breaking the whole thing, too bad. You understand? Well, the unilateralists were convinced that soon their opponents would disappear, so it's okay to provoke them. That's always the dream, the ideal, the guys, unilateralists. They said, we're going to win anyway. The others will either come over to us or they'll disappear. And so, what the heck? It's a very modernist. Isn't it interesting? What I'm talking about is associated with modernity. This is true all across modern culture. The most vicious example of this is Hitler, but that's only the most vicious on a long spectrum. The whole thing in general is you toss out tradition in favor of the modern, and on the contrary, you and I have grown up in a culture which prizes revolutionary, we'll use that word, revolutionary activity. It's a revolution in art. It's a revolution in culture. It's a revolution in politics. And all of them, well, what's a great revolution? The conservative, with a small c, has always said throughout history, you don't make revolutions, you make little changes, right? And you're very careful about how you do that, because your ideas of changing the whole system, as with war, always leads to unintended consequences. Yeah? But the revolutionary doesn't see it that way. They want me to talk about the 60s. Wasn't the 60s all about that? Sure. The young kids and the other idiots, they say, let's talk. Well, I'm serious. They say, oh, America stinks. Let's toss it out and get something different. Wait a minute. I'm serious now. I know you're laughing, I said it in a funny way, but real, what was the attitude in the 60s? The establishment stinks. Anybody over 30 stinks. All the rest of it, let's toss out America. And what are you going to replace it with? I mean, God forbid if they would have succeeded, right? We'd be under a fascism now. You understand? And they say, oh, George Washington was a sissy who walked around with a funny hair and thing like that. Yeah, really? And you're going to do better? The guys who burned down Columbia and Woodstock and all, they're going to do better? You understand? What, because somebody's a good musician? Therefore, they have insights into politics and political science. You get it? But the oilam is a goyim. The public is stupid. This is what history shows. And what can you do about it? Fortunately, they didn't succeed, but they caused a lot of trouble. Now, as you see, I'm very objective on this subject. Now, anyway, my point over here is, instead of a consensus society, I repeat, a consensus society with all the frustrations that a consensus society always presents to unilateralists, in place of that, in Jewish history in the modern era, you get a cultural civil war society, which is the condition of the Jewish people for the last 2 centuries or so. Right? And here's what happened. The Reform came out with the first temple. So the Chassam Sofer, Rabbi Kiva came out, Eila Divrei Bris. So everything about the Reform is totally treif, and you have to secede, it had nothing to do with them. And next thing you know, now instead of the Kehillah, you have the Orthodox and the Reformed. Actually, the Reformed and the Orthodox. And each one gets far away from the other, and each one builds up more and more contempt for the other. On the one side, meaning on the side of the Reform or the modernists, you have condescension. Anyway, what's the next? The old time guy talk Yiddish, out of the way. And then the other side is repaid with total delegitimation. Right? There's the poster boy for total delegitimation of the non-Frum, okay, of the Reform to be exact. Now fast forward this to modern Israel. Isn't this exactly what I was talking about a minute ago? Okay? He represented the face of condescension. He represented the face of total delegitimation. They couldn't talk. Now, it's interesting that by 52, Ben-Gurion, who was a smart cookie, saw condescension ain't working so well. And so we got to, the Haredim he saw already then, although small, are here to stay. He hoped in small enclaves, but he could do the arithmetic. And so where's it going to go as more and more happen? And so all of a sudden you start to see the condescenders, some of them, the more intelligent among them, start to have second thoughts. But it's late in the game, my friends, if you get to 1952, and it's really late in the game if you get to 2015. Okay? And so what, again, is the plan? Now I'm going to show you something, and it's going to be a fairly long segment, but I hope you'll find it fascinating. You should. And listen closely, because and I found a piece which with English subtitles. And this is a speech perhaps some of you read, because I know I have a well-read audience that I'm addressing. And Yair Lapid, a couple years ago, I think in 2012, made a speech. Do you remember this? To a Haredi audience, that is to say, they were like in some kind of a college program in Israel. And it's quite a remarkable speech, because he said exactly, I was shocked. He said exactly what I just told you. And he's coming from a super Chiloni point of view, and what he's saying is like this: we condescended to you, and all this kind of stuff. It hasn't worked out, because your numbers are getting bigger and bigger, and we realize now that our condescension was not well based. And so, although he's not using the words that I use, he's pleading, although I only have a segment, about 10 minutes, but I think you'll find it very worthwhile, because I do think it's very thought-provoking. He'll say like this: he doesn't use these words, but he say, can we reestablish a community? It's kind of late in the day. Can you put Humpty Dumpty together again after it's busted up? You understand? He says, we thought that we could run Jewish history without God, and we thought we could run Jewish history without Yiddishkeit. And you'll see, he says these very words, but you won. And what he says he won, he doesn't only mean demographically, although he does mean it demographically. That's a very important part. But he also means it in terms of ideationalism, because what is the Judaic content of the state of Israel? the Chiloni part. And if there's no Judaic content on the part of the state of Israel, what are we doing here? Why are we asking our kids to fight and get killed? All right? I'm not going to say any more since it's in English, English subtitles. So take it away and you'll see for yourself. I hope you'll be as impressed with it as I hope you'll be. Go ahead.
שכולם עומדים וכל אחד מחכה שהשני ייכנע, ועל זה כתב רבי, אדם חובש כיפה, סטטוס קוו התבסס על ההנחה המשותפת השגויה שהתקבלה משני צידי המתרס, כי המחנה היריב נידון להתמעט, לדרוך, ואולי גם לעבור מן העולם. ואני יודע שזה מה שהחרדים תמיד חשבו על החילונים, שסופם להיעלם. אבל זה גם מה שאנחנו חשבנו עליכם, שאתם מין מוזיאון חי, שאתם כמו הספארי ברמת גן. יש מקום שיש בו איזה זן נדיר, כמעט נכחד, שצריך לשמור עליו, ואז נוכל יום אחד להביא לשם את הנכדים ולהראות להם, נוכל להראות להם, נגיד, ככה פעם, נראה יופי. אני מזכיר לכם שבן גוריון עשה את הסכם תורתו אומנותו, המספר המקורי היה 700 איש. זה היה אמור להיות כל עולם הישיבות במדינת ישראל, 700 איש. היום רק בישיבת מיר יש יותר מ-3,500 איש. ואגב, הרעיון הזה, שפעם ככה נראה יהודי, הוא רעיון שאין לו שום אחיזה במציאות. הוא נובע מזה שהחילונים קנו את הסיפור שלפיו החרדים מייצגים את היהדות של פעם, שקיימת כבר אלפי שנים, אבל במונחים היסטוריים, התנועה החרדית היא תנועה חדשה יחסית. אם צריך למצוא לה נקודת התחלה, אז זה באמת במאה ה-18, כשהחתם סופר קובע את העיקרון של חדש אסור מן התורה. אבל הפריצה האמיתית של התנועה החרדית זה במאה ה-19, כשרבנים נבהלים מזה שמושג חדש חודר לעולם היהודי, והמושג הזה נקרא חילונים. והחילונים באים בשתי צורות. הם באים בצורה אחת זה תנועת ההשכלה, בצורה השנייה זה התנועה הציונית, ומול שתי התנועות האלה קמה תנועת נגד של יהודים דתיים, ותנועת הנגד הזאת יוצרת אתכם, את החרדים. אני יודע שזה לא מה שלימדו אתכם, אז אני מציע שלא תאמינו לי, אלא תבדקו את זה. תלכו לבדוק את ההיסטוריה ביושר, ואתם תגלו שהמצב ההיסטורי האמיתי הוא שלא רק החילונים נולדו כתגובה לחרדיות, אלא גם החרדים נולדו כתגובה לחילוניות, ושתי התנועות האלה חיו מהיום הראשון במצב של התנגשות מתמדת, עד שהם הגיעו לנקודה של עימות. ובעימות הזה אתם ניצחתם. ולא ניצחתם רק במספרים. זו גם הנוכחות החרדית בפוליטיקה ובתנועת ההתיישבות, בככוח צרכני וברחוב ובתרבות ובמערכת החינוך. בכל המקומות האלה אתם ניצחתם, וכשאני מסתכל עליכם פה, שמעתי להם את הנתונים, אז אני מצפה גם לניצחון להמשך בשוק העבודה. כי התברר שאין שום דרך לבנות את הישראליות בלעדיכם. לא משנה כמה ניסינו, לא משנה כמה התאמצנו. הישראליות לא יכולה להתקיים בלי היהדות, והיהדות לא יכולה להתקיים בלי החרדיות, אז ניצחתם. לניצחון הזה יש שתי סיבות. הסיבה הראשונה היא כמובן דמוגרפיה. כשמדינת ישראל הוקמה, הייתה למקימיה איזה דמות, איזו תפיסה מאוד ברורה על הדרך שבה היא צריכה להיראות. היא הייתה צריכה להיות מדינה סוציאליסטית, חילונית ואירופאית. זה היה הזרם המרכזי שלה, ובמשך 50 שנה לא החזיק מעמד. אבל לאט לאט התחילו להצטבר סביב הזרם המרכזי שבטים. השבט החרדי אשכנזי, והשבט החרדי ספרדי, והשבט הדתי-לאומי, והשבט הבית"רי. ובשנות ה-50 הגיעו הנה שבטים מצפון אפריקה, שהפכו להיות שבטי הפריפריה. ובתחילת שנות ה-90 הגיע הנה השבט הרוסי, ואחריו השבט האתיופי, ולכל שבט כזה היו צרכים, וכל שבט כזה דרש משהו מהזרם המרכזי. ולכל היו צרכים כלכליים, כמו של השבטים של הפריפריה או השבטים הרוסיים והאתיופיים. כל אחד רצה משהו. וכל אחד אכל משהו מהזרם המרכזי. ולאט לאט השבטים גם הסתננו לכל מוקדי הכוח המסורתיים של הזרם המרכזי, בהתחלה לצה"ל, אחר כך לאקדמיה, אחר כך לעסקים. וכשהזרם המרכזי של הישראליות ניסה להגן על שלו, כי זה האינסטינקט של כל קבוצה, להגן על האינטרסים שלנו, אז הם אמרו לו, תראה, אתה תיקעת אותנו, אתה מנעת מאיתנו את הזכויות שלנו, ואנחנו לא נסכים לזה. והם צדקו, כי הזרם המרכזי באמת תיקע אותנו, הוא באמת מנע מהם את הזכויות שלנו, והם באמת לא היו צריכים לסבול את זה. וחוץ מזה קרה עוד דבר. הזרם המרכזי כבר לא היה הרוב. בסוף שנות ה-70 כבר חיו בישראל יותר ספרדים מאשכנזים. ומאז שנות ה-80 יש פה הרבה יותר אנשים שמגדירים את עצמם כמסורתיים או כדתיים מאשר חילונים. וירושלים היא עיר הרבה יותר גדולה מתל אביב. ומאז 1977 הימין הקפיטליסטי נמצא בשלטון רוב הזמן, 34 שנה מתוך 40. ובסקר שעשו ב-1994 התברר ש56% מהציבור מאמין שהתורה ניתנה בסיני. אז היה ברור שהאיזון בין השבטים לזרם המרכזי התערער. הזרם המרכזי הוא כבר לא הרוב. הוא לא הרוב מספרית, הוא לא הרוב כלכלי, הוא לא הרוב פוליטי, הוא לא הרוב אידיאולוגי. ואז בסוף שנות ה-90 באיחור ניכר קרה משהו שהיה צפוי. הזרם המרכזי נורא נמאס. הזרם המרכזי הסתכל שמאלה וימינה ואמר לעצמו, נמאס לי מזה שכל אחד צריך ממני משהו. ואם הם לא רוצים שאני אוביל את המדינה, אז שיוביל אותם בעצמם. כי יש לי פתרון חדש. מעכשיו גם אני אהיה שבט. והזרם המרכזי הפך להיות שבט. לצורך העניין, זה מאוד אקטואלי, אתם יכולים לכנות אותו שבט המעמד הבינוני. הוא אמר לעצמו, אני לא צריך את המדינה בשביל לעשות עסקים, ואני יכול להתחתן בקפריסין בנישואים אזרחיים, ואני צריך להגן על הדמוקרטיה, כי השבטים האחרים באופן אינסטינקטיבי הם או לא דמוקרטיים או פחות דמוקרטיים. ונמאס לי מזה שיש לי ילד אחד בבני ברק וילד אחד באום אל-פחם, שמעולם לא פגשתי, אבל כספי המיסים שלי מממנים אותם, ואני בטח לא צריך שכל הזמן כולם יגידו לי שדיכאתי אותם. אם אני כל כך מדכא אותם, שיסתדרו בלעדיי. אני אעשה מה שכולם עושים. אני אדאג לעצמי. אני אדאג לעצמי, ואני אדאג לאנשים שלי. וזוהי הדרך שבה הדברים נעמדו בשנים האחרונות. במקום מדינה שיש בה זרם מרכזי אחד שסביבו יש שבטים, הפכנו למדינה שיש בה רק שבטים. ויש לזה בעיה קטנה אחת. המדינה לא תחזיק מעמד כך. לא רק ישראל, אין אף מדינה בעולם שיכולה להחזיק מעמד אם אין לה איזה גרעין משותף. אם אין לה איזה בסיס רחב שעליו כולם יכולים להסכים. וזה מוביל אותי לסיבה השנייה, לזה שאנחנו הפסדנו ואתם ניצחתם, וזו הסיבה הרוחנית. כשאבות הציונות באו הנה לארץ, הם אמרו שהם רוצים לבנות כור היתוך לעם היהודי, והם רוצים לחפש באמת בסיס רחב של הסכמה בין כל החלקים של העם. והם התעלמו מהעובדה שלעם היהודי כבר היה בסיס כזה, כי לעם היהודי היה אבא. הם רצו לבנות כור היתוך חילוני וסוציאליסטי, והתעלמו מן העובדה שלעם היהודי היה אב קדמון שתחזק אותו במשך 2000 שנה ושמר עליו. והאב הקדמון הזה נקרא כמובן אלוקי ישראל. אני רוצה להדגיש, אני לא מדבר עכשיו על אמונה, כי אמונה זה דבר אחר. אני מדבר על השאלה מהו הבסיס החברתי והתרבותי שעליו מונח האתוס הישראלי. הניסיון של האבות המייסדים היה לדלג ישירות מהמקרא אל ימינו. הם רצו לבנות לו אתוס שהוא תנכי ולא תלמודי. כי התנ"ך קרה פה. כי שאול המלך הלך לחפש את האתונות שלו בכביש 443. שם הוא חיפש. והם תכננו לבסס על התנ"ך את החיבור בין עם ישראל לארץ ישראל. כי הם היו כמעט כולם תלמידי ישיבה שהורידו את הכיפה, וביניהם המסורת התלמודית הייתה משהו ששייך לגלות, משהו ששייך לבית שהם החליטו לעזוב. אז כדי לבנות את האתוס התנ"כי שלהם, הם החליטו לדלג על המשנה והמדרש והתלמוד ותור הזהב בספרד והרמח"ל והחתם סופר וגם על בשבי זינגר ושלום עליכם ורבי נחמן מברסלב, ובמקום איזה חזון שהוא רב-ממדי ורב-שכבתי עם יכולת להכיל את כל הגוונים השונים שיש בתוך העם, הם בנו אתוס שהתאים לחילונים אשכנזים סוציאליסטים ורצו שכל השבטים האחרים יכפיפו את עצמם לאתוס הזה. וזה לא נעשה מרשעות, וזה לא נעשה מטיפשות. זה היה היגיון של חילונים. ההיגיון של מייסדי המדינה אמר ככה: אם במשך 2000 שנה אלוקים לא הוביל את עם ישראל לארץ ישראל, אז הגיע הזמן לתת למישהו אחר לנסות. הגיע הזמן לבנות מיתוס אחר. וכשהשואה הגיעה, זה נראה להם כמו הוכחה לזה שאכן אסור לסמוך על אלוקי היהודים כי הוא אבא לא אמין. אנחנו יכולים לסמוך רק על עצמנו. אז ניסינו לסמוך רק על עצמנו. רק שהניסיון הזה נכשל. הוא נכשל כי הוא גרם לזה שכל מי שלא היה חילוני אשכנזי וסוציאליסטי השתבלל עוד יותר לתוך השבט שלו. בייחוד כשהוא גילה שבחזון החדש שמציעים לו אין מקום לדבר שהיה הכי יקר בליבו, שזה האלוקים שלו. הוא נכשל עוד יותר מפני שההסבר של מייסדי המדינה היה לא מספק. הוא לא הצדיק את ישיבתנו פה. כי אם אנחנו מוצאים מהסיפור את האב הקדמון שלנו, למה אנחנו פה? למה שאדם חילוני יבחר לחיות דווקא בשכונה הכי גרועה בעולם, בתוך מיליארד מוסלמים ששונאים אותו, בחום הזה, אם הוא לא מאמין שיש איזה כוח חיצוני שבזכותו שווה לו לחיות?
I guess that's, yeah. Don't you agree that it was worthwhile? Now, that's what, you don't have to go. That's the first half of it. I'm not showing you all because I'll take the whole evening up. It goes on for twice as long, you know what I mean? That's the first half. I just want to give you, and isn't it a remarkable talk? And it's, and you could find it, you know, obviously yourselves. I know, as I say, I'm dealing with an educated audience. It pays, it's somewhere online. Just Google, Yair Lapid and Haredim or something like that. And the point is, that, isn't he? It's funny how he must have gone to my lectures. You know what I'm saying? No, all joking aside. Woke up, well, yes and no. His diagnosis of the historical causes of the current crisis is almost spot on. You know, we could argue a little bit, but, you know, it's basically correct. He just didn't use the word unilateralism, but that's what we're talking about, isn't it? And the reactions to the unilateralism, as I expressed it tonight, and the digging of the heels. Problem is, this was said in 2012, when he came to power, he reverted to unilateralism. He tried to. So in other words, that's always the problem. You know, once you get into power, what happened over there? Now this is meaning he immediately went to force, as you know, the Haredim now to go get drafted, right? And I understand where he's coming from, but you understand that you push me, I'll push back. And so, this is partly due to the fact, that the Haredim, now winning, were in no mood to change the game to suit the Chilonim. Because what he's saying is like this: we messed you up this and that and the other, it hasn't worked out, let's go, you know, let's forget all that and go, and no, why do you live in a good apartment, I live poor, and I don't like those rules, you see? But it's also due to the unilateralism, meaning everything that he identified, and he said, you know, we confess, we did this to you, and so on and so forth, but when you do all that, just to simply say, now turn on a dime, doesn't quite work so well. And so these people, you know, there's the Varlin Steinman, there's the Ger Rebbe, there's the Belzer Rebbe, all that, they don't see it that way, you know, let's all change. Now, maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't, you know, that's a nice discussion, and I'm serious, I don't mean to be funny about that, but this is the way it is, okay? Now, on the other hand, There is in the Israeli body politic today people who understand this the way he just did. And I'm going to show you again a 2-minute, but there are voices that see consensus, but they get shut down, right? In other words, it's difficult. We're going through what's a healthy process, in my opinion, in the Democratic Society. They're trying to work this out, this Haredi business, other wizards, the draft, the other draft. It ain't easy to just turn around and say everything overnight, because then you want unilateralism. Drop dead, follow my rules, and the heck with what you believe until now. Then the Haredim said, well, you drop dead and follow our rules, you see? And so, if you know actually what happened in the last year or two, you know that they passed a law, and the law is very funny, and it has a lot of loopholes, and they're trying, and even so, the Frum are angry about it, and they're trying to work something out that it'll be acceptable. And what's really interesting is that you find, I'll show you a 2-minute speech by Ayelet Shaked, if anybody knows who that is. And she's secular, but she's in the right-wing party. She's in the Bennett's party and all that. She's a Likudnik. And you'll see over there, very interesting, and she's the one who wrote the law. She was the head of the commission that wrote the Shaked law, which is the drafting of the yeshiva boys, with all the problems in it. And it says this year 2 people, next year 3 people, and the ones who don't get can go straight to work. You know, it's got all kind of loopholes, and the real hardcore Chilim are very angry it has all these kind of loopholes. But guess what? The real hardcore Haredim don't want any loopholes either. And so she's trying to work some in the middle. And in the Knesset, you'll see, unfortunately, I don't have an English translation, but you'll listen, maybe you'll pick up. She said like this, she says, listen, there's several armies out there. We all have to acknowledge it. There's also the army of the Lomdei Torah. Right? It's interesting. And she's not from. She's, Israel needs this kind of army, and Israel needs that kind of army. And it's the beginning of a language of trying to get past the condescension and the unilateralism and get back and the other one. I don't know where it's going to go, and maybe she's a lone voice, and maybe she's not a lone voice. But it's very interesting when you study in the light of what we've been talking about this year, and you do this in a somewhat intelligent fashion, how words matter, because only the children say sticks and stones make my bones, the names that will hurt me. In real life, names hurt, don't they? Okay? So take a look at this. She's not from. How many people understood what she said? Just interested, a few people. But I hope you got the general idea. It's very interesting, and I couldn't find the subtitles. But basically, she says, I'm cutting it to its core essentials. She says, first of all, we're not trying to do anything to bridge the gap, and we need to do that. Everybody's talking about Shivyon HaNetel, which is the popular word in Israel, which is sharing the burden. And she says, Israel, if you look through it Jewishly and through it historically, has a threefold burden: Haganah, Avodah, Torah. We need people in the army. We need people learning. And she's the one who's writing the draft law. You get what I'm saying? And so and she went on to say, she says, I'm Chiloni and I'm not a Baal Tshuva and all the rest of it, and I don't practice this stuff, but I recognize the importance of this. No, she's talking language of 200 years ago and before that. The Kehillah that I was speaking about beforehand, which is, I may not do this, but we need people who do this, we need people do this. We also need a few modern criminals on the left. He says sometimes you need them too, and you need some people on the right, and it's all one big kind of thing. But if everybody's going to take the attitude, it's my way or the highway, then you have the same problem. What do you do with the Arabs? And what do you do with the Arab-Israeli? No, you end up with an unsolvable problem. And so what this is raising, the question is the religious, non-religious split solvable or is it unsolvable? Right? Now, theoretically, it's solvable, but will it be solved? You get what I'm saying. Right now, there's no consensus because they passed this law in spite of the Haredi protests. So they didn't say we're going to negotiate until we finally get something. If we don't get anything, we won't pass a law. Instead, they passed the law. Let's go to the next one. And what you have now, as everybody knows, is you have all kind of protests in the streets, right? This is of our Sheva just yesterday or something like this. And here's a Haredi protest against the draft. You understand? So in other words, this is not. This is what. Here are the two faces of the possible ways it's going to go. One is this is an unsolvable problem. The other one is a solvable problem. It ain't pashut. That's my point. Okay, that's enough. I mean, it's just more of the same. So what I'm trying to say is it's not just a draft issue, it's a legitimacy issue. You understand? Legitimacy issue in many ways. Legitimacy of the State of Israel, which is up for grabs, for discussion. Legitimacy of the Haredim, up for discussion. The legitimacy of people not serving in the army is up for discussion. It's all kind of fundamental issues, which if somebody just dismisses it, immediately is going to cause a problem to be unsolvable, as I just said before. If the Haredim become a majority, and if they vote the state out of existence, Zionism will approve like the Haskalah to be a mere episode in long history. There are plenty of Haredim, especially if you're very ideological, to say, good, this is the way it should be, because then we will have been proved right. You understand? Once it disappears, we'll prove that we're the only viable Judaism. Believe me, that's the end plan for many, and it's worked throughout our history. We've come across many groups that we've not been able to overcome or defeat by argument, just outlasted them. I'll give you an example. The Tzedukim, right? The Asim. There are many groups like this in history. You can't say today who was right and who was wrong. History proved, you see? So they want to say like this. The Haskalah, history proves they all died out. Reform Judaism, another generation is gone. 2 generations is gone. That will prove that we were right. You understand when you have that kind of attitude? So it's a zero-sum game. And it is a reaction to unilateralism. You push me, I'll push you back. What I just described is the way tradition will push back, which it will outlive you, will bury you, and then we'll move on, and we will prove that we were right. You understand? Because in America, you will all have become, Gentiles anyway, through intermarriage or things like that. You won't care. And that's one way of looking at it. Same thing with the Pew Report in America. If a generation or two non from Judaism, if not Jews, will have disappeared, if in a generation or two there is, for example, no more associated or no more federations, after all, the Frum aren't interested, and the non-Frum aren't interested each for its own cultural reasons. In another generation, the number one problem the Associated in Baltimore has, and Federation out of the country, is their traditional group of givers is disappearing. Because the children of the traditional group of givers are so out of it, they may possibly give for environmental causes. You understand? They may go and give, for African relief, but they give nothing for Jewish. And I'm not talking about Frum, right? I'm talking about people whose families have traditionally been associated with funding communal projects. Well, guess what? If all these guys in the federations don't get a salary anymore, now all the different types of Judaism will have been proven by history to have been false. That's the theory here. And then from Judaism will have won. It will have been a costly victory, but the casualties will not have been our fault. They will have been the fault of the unilateralists, who have been proven to be not just irresponsible breakers of the centuries-long religious consensus, but fools. Okay? And they'll go back to what he said, right, Schiller, which is history is the final court. Geschichte ist Gerichte, right? And so what happened to all these movements? They just disappeared on their own. Given enough time, given enough rope. Because by the nature of it, they didn't develop the kind of institutional, structural kind of things that traditional and religious Judaism has had. You understand? In other words, if you don't favor endogamy, for example, you understand, then where's it going? Now, it's very heavy. It's very sad. But those who condemn this do not take their own unilateralism into account. So much as human personality, right? The same guy who said before that, we cause all trouble in Israel, but once he gets into power, it doesn't see that way. And the Haredim and the others, they don't see that way either, Everybody just sees their own unilateralism. It's a big problem for Israel, who, as you see tonight I'm arguing, have a challenge to come up with a new discourse. Right? With a new discourse. They have to discover one. It can't be what you tell them. They have to come up with this on their own. In the Ben Gurion era, and the Chilonim had the advantage of being a very large majority, the Haredim a very small minority. Ben Gurion instinctively wanted to create some kind of modus vivendi, to have the Haredim and the acquiesce in Zionism in one form or another. And that's why Ben Gurion was always friends with the head of the Aguda. But it never was a real dialogue. It was strictly, I'll give you these votes and you give me this money and that sort of thing. On the other hand, if we've seen, the Ben Gurion era was an era of marked cultural and religious Mapai insensitivity. The actions of cutting off the payas of the Sephardim and the Teimanim. The religious and cultural insensitivity of the Jewish agency bureaucrats. The blatant racism towards the Sephardim. The infuriating cultural condescension towards the ultra-Orthodox, as they like to called by the mainstreams. Establishment types. All these remain seared in the memories of the Sephardim and the Haredim, and they remain there today. They're core elements of the Haredi identity, of the Sephardi identity. Your identity is you were one who was worked over by the system when you came to Israel. That's a definition of who you are, okay? They feel they were raped, and they have no closure. That's exactly what we're talking about. Now, I don't know if Yair Lapid quite sees it that way, but I think he does. And by the way, this is a bureaucratic mentality. The Jewish agency did the same thing in the middle of the 1980s to the Ethiopians. Even though it was 30 years after the 50s, and so you figure books had already been written, people realized what was going on over there. I'm wrong. Yeah, I'm wrong. It probably would happen today. Now, the Russians were a perfect group. They came in, they were not religious, they didn't have those problems. But the Ethiopians have a long religious tradition of their own, and their own culture, and as we all know, it has led to terrible, terrible problems. And so, what can I tell you? In 1997, prior to the 2000 election, in 1997, when Ehud Barak became the head of the Labor Party, he did issue a public apology to the Sephardim, but this was perceived to be not sincere. So let's go to the next one. Yeah, look at this. This is off the news. The apology was made in an attempt to reach an important block of Sephardi voters, and he said things were done bad to you and all the rest of it. Okay? Y'all see this? Right? How they were messed over? Now go to the next one. Shimon Peres immediately said like this: this is not true. He avoided direct comment. He says his recollections do not match those of Barak. I don't remember any feelings of regret or discrimination. I feel our brothers. My heart is full of pride in what we achieved, despite the mistake. No revolution has succeeded in 20th century like Zionist revolution. What do you think the Sephardim say when they hear that? Now, I know what Paris means, and so do you. Israel did a lot, and especially him. But on the other hand, what about the people that were shafted by the system? What about the people, for example, who built Dimona, who I told you earlier this semester, were hired by the Mapai, but for 59 days, because of 60 days, you get benefits, So they hired 59 days, then fired and hired 2 days later. You get it? And what about if you're the grandson of that person? And what do you do if you see Paris and everybody say, oh, the Ben Gurion period was a glorious period, everything was good, there's nothing to apologize. That's what he says, he says nothing to apologize for. Teddy Kollek also says, I want to disassociate myself in public apology. And the funny part is, Barak didn't even mean it. This had to do with election politics. You understand? And so these issues are there. The old guys don't want to go away. Here, let's do the next one. Right, let's go to the next one. No, I'm sorry. Oh, you didn't have the... Okay, fine. I was just going to show a picture of Teddy Kollek and the other one. Now, by the way, listen, there's plenty of racism in the Haredi world. Okay, yeah, they're up there. Okay, fine. I'm sorry. Look, there's plenty of racism in the Haredi world. True? And Sephardi racism towards the Ethiopians. Okay? So, everybody can say, don't make fun of me, you do the same thing. But that's not the issue as they see it. Everybody's focused on the wrong done to him, not on the wrong he does to others. That is human nature, my friends. So you can't expect, more than that. On the other hand, to counter everything I've been saying, there is the other centripetal dynamic. Not centrifugal, but centripetal dynamic. The Hamas rockets want to kill everybody. They don't care what kind of Jew you are. True? Let's take a look at the next one. Right? When they shoot over here, it's indiscriminate towards Israel. And so what they're really doing is saying, Kol Yisrael Chaverim. I know it sounds funny, but it's not funny at all. If you're a religious Jew, not a religious Jew, whatever, you say, I guess we are a community of faith. whether we like it or not, okay? And so we depart this long series of talks on the Ben Gurion era at high noon with a mixed bag. Unfortunately, the way things are going, it may be that the Iran nuclear issue emerges as Israel's greatest threat. That's the way it seems right now in terms of existential threat. We all know the fight's going about the speech in Congress and all that. In that case, it may turn out that Dimona, that quirky, private, and secret project of Ben Gurion and Shimon Peres in the late 50s, may turn out to be the most fateful accomplishment of 1957-61, the Ben Gurion era at high noon, right? This thing that took a place away from the public scene. Dimona was meant to provide Israel with deterrence to make sure nuclear conflict did not happen. Henry Kissinger was the famous guy in the 50s to talk about nuclear weapons as something you don't use. Right? The whole purpose is make sure you don't use them. Problem is, with the apocalyptic nuts that run Iran and place like that, who knows? Right? Ben Gurion was thinking of the good old Cold War. America, Russia, somewhat rational. States are rational to the point that they don't get destroyed. You understand? And by the way, even with all that, you and I know we came close a couple times, like Kennedy missile crisis. It wasn't a double push at all. And now talk to me about 2015 in the Middle East. So Ben Gurion left us, I would argue, and I finish with this, with an ambiguous legacy. As I say, the glass half full, glass half empty. But this is what a honest look at history yields us, I would argue. And with that, I close the entire series.